I want us to do something. I want us to pray this morning. I want to pray for the situation in the Middle East. Some of you be aware of what's going on. About 9 days ago, Israel started bombing Iran. Iran replied to attack Israel last night. America bombed Iran, and there's a lot of confusion. What does this mean? And there's a lot of opinions flying around, but I just want to give just a minute or two overview, because I believe we are in an Esther moment. An Esther moment. I'll explain what that means in just a minute. Because the main issue in this war is not political, it's actually spiritual. And there's a very interesting, if you study Iran through the Bible, and some of you go, I've never seen Iran in the Bible. I'm going to give you two names to look for in the Bible. The first name by which Iran was known in the Bible is Elam. Elam. You see Elam, very interesting, the interplay between Abraham and the nation of Elam. In Genesis chapter 13, remember the story of Abraham. Abraham has a nephew called Lot, and Lot settles in Sodom. And the king of Elam has a coalition of forces, and they come and they capture Sodom, and they capture Lot and his family, and they take them captive. And so what Abraham does is Abraham has an army, because he's a wealthy man, he has his own forces, and he goes and he defeats the king of Elam and rescues his nephew and his nephew's family from the king of Elam. And he comes back from the victory, and so again, it's the interplay between Israel, because Israel came from Abraham, and Iran. What happens is, after this victory over Iran, Abraham comes back and bumps into a king called Melchizedek. And Melchizedek brings out bread and wine and confirms a covenant with Abraham that God is going to make Abraham's descendants as vast as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Just bear this in mind. So the destiny of Abraham's descendants somehow is connected in this relationship with Iran and Israel. Now, don't draw all kinds of wrong conclusions. What I'm trying to do here is to help you understand this morning that there have been significant moments in the history of God's people Israel connected to Iran. The next name that the Bible uses for Iran is Persia. Okay? So Persia, you'll see that all over the Old Testament, the kingdom of Persia or the Persian Empire. Now, Israel, when they came into their land, they were disobedient to God. When God brought them out of Egypt into the promised land, they disobeyed God, and God said, if you disobey me, you'll be taken into captivity for 70 years. And the king of Babylon, which was the greatest empire on the world at the time, which covered most of Iraq and most of what is now Iran, they came and they destroyed the temple. But even in the midst of these prophecies that God's going to take you into captivity and destroy the temple, was this mysterious promise that Isaiah brought in Isaiah chapter 44. And he said, a king by the name of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. I'm going to use him for my purposes, and he will, even though the temple's going to be destroyed, this guy Cyrus, he is going to command the temple to be rebuilt. Well, strangely enough, Israel's in captivity, and when the 70 years is up, the Persian Empire rises up and defeats the Babylonian Empire. And the leader of the Persian Empire is a man by the name of Cyrus. And the first thing that Cyrus does is he says to a bunch of the Jews, I am setting you free to go and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. That's crazy, isn't it? So once again, Israel's purpose and destiny tied to the nation of Persia. somehow. Then a few years later, and this is a grave lesson that we have to learn, a few years later, I don't know if you remember the story of King Saul. And King Saul, some of you have seen that movie, that series on Amazon or wherever it is about King David, and it has the beginnings of King David. It shows King Saul. Well, King Saul lost his kingdom because he didn't obey God in all that God asked him to do. And God says, if you're not going to obey me, I'm going to give the kingship to someone else. And that's how David, but the thing that King Saul did specifically was God told him to destroy the nation of the Amalekites, because the Amalekites had resisted Israel on their way out from Egypt and wouldn't let them pass by without a fight. And God says, I am going to punish Amalek because of the way that they treated you, and you go out and fight against the Amalekites and you defeat them and destroy them all. And King Saul's guys thought, well, there's some good stuff that the Amalekites have. We'll keep the good stuff. We'll keep the nice-looking people, and we'll kill all the bad people. But we think there's some decent people and there's some decent stuff. We want to, if you disobey God, it comes back and bites you later. And Samuel shows up, and the king of the Amalekites, they'd let him live. He's a man by the name of Agag. And obviously they let other people continue to live, because years later, after the days of King Cyrus, there was a king that came along in Persia while Israel's rebuilding the temple, or just after they've rebuilt the temple. And this name of this king is Ahasuerus, or Xerxes. You read about him in the book of Esther. And somehow, the king's right-hand man is a guy by the name of Haman. And it says this, now Haman was an Agagite. In other words, somehow a descendant of this guy called Agag, the Amalekite, years and years later had made his way into the kingdom of Persia, and he has a thing against the Jews. And he persuades the king of Persia to do what the king of Persia was not called to do, namely, destroy the Jewish people. And there's a beautiful picture of redemption that happens, because God raises up this little Jewish girl called Esther, who stands before the king and says, this guy needs to be destroyed. His plans are evil. His family has always had a thing against my family, and the plan of the enemy is defeated. Now, the interesting thing is, Queen Esther was a direct descendant of King Saul. Came from the same town as King Saul. So the Lord redeems the family of Saul. His descendant does what Saul didn't do. And it says redemption for the tribe of Benjamin in that. But anyway, the point is, again, there's a connection between Israel and Persia, and because of this connection between the Jews and the Persians, Israel almost gets wiped out, but because of the king of Persia issuing a different decree, Israel gets saved. And the king of Persia then decides something. He decides, I'm going to make one of these Jews my right-hand man instead of Agag. And he makes a man called Mordecai his right-hand guy. And the influence of Mordecai is so strong that the next king, the king's son, says, I want to have a Jewish guy be my main right-hand man. And the next king to come along appoints a guy by the name of Nehemiah to be his right-hand guy. It's not an accident. It's because of Esther that Mordecai got elevated, and it's because of the influence of Mordecai, who was respected by the Persians, that Nehemiah is elevated, and through Nehemiah, Jerusalem was rebuilt in preparation for the coming of the Messiah. So again, once again, you have an intersection between Iran and Israel. And it's all about the purposes of God coming forth on the earth. Now, I believe what's going on right now in Iran. Now, I want you to understand this. We look and we just go, all those Muslim nations. Iran is a people group that is almost more ancient than the Arab nations. The religion of Islam has taken over all those nations, but in their core identity, Iran, don't confuse Iran with Iraq and Saudi Arabia, because it's the Arabs and the Persians and the Jews. There's many, many people groups going on here. And I believe there is a unique destiny that God has for Persia, actually related to God's sovereign purpose for Israel. I'm not going to elaborate and say what that is or anything like that. And if you're confused about what is God's purpose for Israel anyway, I'm going to teach a class on it in the Revival Academy this fall. So sign up for that class in September, because I think it's so important that we understand that. But I believe what we're seeing right now is more than America attacking Iran. What happened in Iran, something terrible happened in Iran in 1979. There was a revolution in a nation that was largely a liberal. It wasn't a liberal democracy, but it was a liberal monarchy. There was much freedom in Iran. There was so much freedom in Iran that one of the largest Jewish populations on the earth actually thrived in the nation of Iran for many, many, many years. They were friends of Israel. And then in 1979, an anti-Semitic spirit, an anti-Jewish spirit called the Spirit of Islam, took over the nation of Iran. Another Haman arose in that nation and perverted the course of that nation in standing with Israel. And at the bottom line, this is what we are in. I believe we, as the covenant people of God, we're in an Esther moment. And our only recourse, it's not to President Trump or the American government. It's not to politics, it's to heaven. And I don't know what the exact time frame or purpose is of all that's going on, but I know this, looking through the Bible, there is a divine connection that is supposed to be established between Israel and Iran, Israel and Persia, and there is a anti-Semitic spirit that wants to destroy God's purposes for Israel, that has invaded that nation. And whether God is raising up America and Israel to, and at the end of the day, overthrow that Islamic regime and set Persia free as much as set Israel free, I don't know. But I know this, whenever those two nations come together in some kind of conflict, the purposes of God move forward in a dramatic way. And so again, I'm just giving you some observations. I'm not drawing any conclusions with that, but I'm saying, when those two nations, when there is conflict over the Jews between Israel and Persia, something good is on the horizon. Whether that's the rebuilding of the temple, whether that's the rebuilding of Jerusalem, whether that's the rescuing of captives, whatever it may be, whether it's the confirmation of the Abrahamic covenant with Melchizedek, I don't know what it is. The Iranians showed up actually in the book of Acts as well. It says there were Elamites in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. They got filled with the Spirit and they probably went back to Persia to preach the gospel. So whenever the Jews and the Persians come into contact, there is an acceleration of God's purpose in some way. And so what I would like us to do, because again, we've been talking about the blood, and one of the reasons that we have access into the throne room of God by the blood, it's not just to enjoy the benefits of salvation, that's an awesome thing. It's so that we can take our stand on behalf of those who do not have a voice and ask the Lord to move on their behalf. And when things get shaken, there is an opportunity for God to move by His Spirit, to shift boundaries, to shift times and seasons, but above all, to save the lost. And I know this, there are those in Persia who are trapped under this burden of Islam. There are those who are terrified by the attack. Let's not, sometimes we can look from the 40,000 view and just go, it's a nation and it's a nation. There are real people like you and me who have husbands and wives and sons and daughters and grandchildren who are terrified every night by the bombs that are flying this way and that way and the other way. And let's ask the Lord that in the midst of the shaking, God would have his way, number one. But number two, there would be a great harvest of souls for the kingdom of God, that God would fill Iran and Israel with the revelation of Jesus. I don't know if you know this, but the greatest revival on the earth right now is in Iran. The fastest growing church on the planet right now is the nation of Iran, and it would be catastrophic if the spread of the gospel was stopped because of fear, because of what's going on. So again, there's a dual purpose going on here. And I would like us just to take some time, not to take a stand in prayer politically, but to say, Lord, join us with your heart. What are you thinking? What are you saying? God, would you intervene in this situation? Not for the glory of America, not for the glory of Israel, but for the glory of the name of Jesus. Can we do that? Just gather in twos or threes just for a few moments. I believe this is one of the main reasons why we assemble together. It is to pray. And when we stand before God and we ask, things change, things shift. So can we do that? Just find 1, 2, 3 people around you, and we'll just spend a couple of moments just interceding before the throne for this.